The sun was setting on a quiet rural road, casting long shadows as a group of bikers revved their engines, roaring down the dirt path. They were looking for trouble, and they found it in the form of a lone farmer's daughter, standing by her father's fence, her eyes cold and watchful. To them, she was just another simple girl from the country, someone they could mess with. They didn't know who they were dealing with. As the bikers closed in, throwing taunts and insults her way, the girl didn't flinch. She was calm, almost eerily so, as if she had heard it all before. The bikers, thinking they were in control, didn't realize they were walking into a trap. You see, this wasn't just any farm girl. She was known by another name, one that struck fear into the hearts of the most hardened criminals. She wasn't just any girl. She was a bounty hunter, feared across the land for her precision and skill. But as the bikers pushed her too far, they were about to learn the hard way. Some taunts come with deadly consequences. Just how far is she willing to go to defend herself? The real question is, how far can they run before they become her next target? The bikers, sensing the silence in the air, exchanged confused glances. They had seen plenty of tough women before, but none of them had that quiet intensity, that fire burning behind her eyes. The leader, a bulky man with a leather jacket that read Razor across the back, revved his engine again, trying to assert dominance. He grinned, thinking he could scare her into submission, but she didn't budge. What they didn't know was that she had been raised by a father who taught her to survive in ways they couldn't begin to understand. Her life had never been about playing games or taking things for granted. Her father had once been a lawman, a respected figure in the community, until a tragic betrayal left him dead, and her world shattered. That's when she learned the art of tracking, hunting, and taking down dangerous men. The girl they saw now wasn't a vulnerable farm girl. She was a trained predator, someone who knew how to make people disappear when they crossed the line. But even with all her skill, her purpose wasn't to start a fight. She had a code. But when the taunts got worse, when the insults began cutting too deep, something inside her snapped. The first move would be hers, and it would be lethal. Razor wasn't the only one underestimating her. His gang, a mix of rough riders and hardened criminals, started circling her like vultures. They were used to having power in numbers, and they figured this was no different. The tension in the air thickened, as if the world itself was holding its breath. It wasn't just about who would win in a fight. It was about who would be left standing when the dust settled. One of the bikers, a young man with a scruffy beard and nervous eyes, stepped forward. He was different from the rest. He had no taste for violence, no thrill in intimidation. His name was Cole, and he'd only joined the gang because it was the only place where he could belong. But now, as he watched his friends laugh and tease her, something tugged at his conscience. He knew this wasn't right. He could feel the storm brewing, and he wasn't sure which side he would fall on when it hit. Meanwhile, she wasn't just standing there waiting. Her hand slid subtly to the small knife strapped to her leg, its handle worn from years of use. Her gaze never left Razor, who was now mocking her father's farm, calling it a place for weaklings and cowards. The insult hit harder than any punch could. Her father had worked the land for decades, had protected the community, and now they were making a mockery of everything he stood for. Cole's eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, and in that instant, he realized something. She wasn't just angry. She was ready for something far worse than a physical fight. He could sense it, the cold calculation in her posture. He wanted to warn her friends, wanted to tell them to back off, but he couldn't. Not yet. Razor had already seen the shift in the air and let out a dark laugh. She thinks she can take us all down. Razor mocked, shaking his head. That's cute. But in that moment, a shift occurred. The wind seemed to pick up, howling through the empty fields, and as if on cue, the sound of distant thunder rumbled in the sky. Was it just the storm rolling in, or something else? The gang had no way of knowing, but she did. She had a reputation for being precise, for hunting with deadly accuracy. Razor and his crew were about to learn the hard way that their game was nothing more than a prelude to something much darker. Cole's heart raced as he felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. Was he too far gone to back out now? The wind picked up again, a sharp gust that sent a chill down everyone's spine. Razor's grin faltered for a split second, but he quickly masked it with a mocking scoff. The tension between the bikers and the girl was so thick, it felt like the air itself was about to snap. Cole's eyes darted nervously between his gang and the girl, his hands trembling as he gripped the handlebars of his bike. Every instinct in him screamed to run, to get out of there before things got out of hand, but he couldn't move. Not yet. She stood there, unmoving, her eyes never leaving Razor. It was like she was waiting for something, some trigger, some signal that would start the storm. Cole noticed it too, the way her fingers tightened around the handle of the knife, the way her stance shifted ever so slightly, ready to strike. She wasn't just a farm girl anymore. She was a hunter, a force of nature, and every biker present could feel it. Razor seemed to sense the shift as well, but he wasn't backing down. "You think you scare me?" he sneered, revving his engine again, louder this time. "We've taken down tougher than you. You're just a girl, hiding behind Daddy's name." The insult struck like a slap to her face. For a brief moment, her expression flickered. Anger, regret, sorrow, all in the same breath. It was the final push she needed. The moment of hesitation was gone. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her father's memory, for everything that had been ripped away from her. The girl they saw wasn't who they thought she was. She wasn't just some simple farm girl. She was a predator. The silence stretched between them, unbearable. Razor revved his engine again, and that's when it happened. A flash of movement, too fast for any of the bikers to react to. The girl was gone, vanished into the shadows of the field. Razor cursed under his breath and slammed the throttle forward, but it was too late. She was already behind him, so close he could feel her breath on his neck. And then the distant rumble of thunder wasn't the only thing they heard. A gunshot, sharp, sudden, deafening, split the air. It wasn't aimed at anyone, not yet, but the message was clear. The hunt had begun. Cole froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The shot had come from nowhere. No one had seen where it had come from, but it didn't matter. It was her warning shot. For a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath again. The bikers knew they had crossed a line, but what they didn't know was that they were now the hunted. And the girl, the one they thought they could control, was no longer someone they could intimidate. The question now was, how far would she go to make them pay? And who would be left standing when the smoke cleared? The sound of the gunshot still echoed in the air, the reverberations fading into the ominous growl of the storm overhead. The bikers stood motionless, their eyes scanning the field, trying to make sense of what just happened. Razor's face twisted in confusion and anger. He revved his engine again, the sound cutting through the tension, but there was no sign of her. Not a single shadow moved in the long grasses. Then, without warning, a second shot rang out. This time it was much closer, so close that the bike's engine seemed to stall in fear. Razor's eyes darted around, but he still couldn't pinpoint the direction. A cold sweat began to form on his brow. "That's it," he spat. "We're not playing games anymore. Get ready." He turned to his gang, signaling them to fan out. But just as they were about to move, something unexpected happened. One of the bikers, the same nervous young man, Cole, suddenly turned his bike around and sped off into the night. His tires screamed against the dirt as he tore down the road, heading back toward town, his heart pounding with fear. Razor's furious roar filled the air as he watched Cole disappear into the distance. "Coward," he yelled, his voice barely carrying over the wind. But Cole wasn't coming back. He couldn't. He knew too much now. In the chaos, no one noticed the shadow that had crept silently up behind them, until it was too late. Without warning, a figure emerged from the trees, moving like a specter. The girl. But now something was different. She wasn't alone. From the darkness, a second figure stepped into view, a tall man cloaked in black. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to send a chill down the bikers' spines. The girl, the bounty hunter, now had an ally, and she was no longer fighting alone. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a reckoning. The mysterious man's cold, calculating gaze locked onto Razor, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the world itself paused. Razor's defiance crumbled. He knew this wasn't just a simple standoff anymore. "Who the hell are you?" Razor growled, his voice trembling.